The ship was dead. It hung in the black like a broken bone, turning slowly in the silence between stars. The hull had been torn open in 3 places, and the metal around the wounds was black and melted. Whatever had killed this vessel had done it quickly and without mercy. Kang Do-hyun stood at the observation window of the UNSS Baeko and looked at the wreck. He was a medic, not a soldier, but he had seen enough death to know what it looked like from a distance. The destroyed ship was a Rethi slave barge. He had read about them during training, long, flat vessels built not for comfort, but for carrying bodies from one place to another. The Rethi were a small species, pale-scaled and quiet, and the galaxy had spent 300 years treating them like furniture. Captain Bae Sujin stood behind him on the bridge. She was a sharp woman with a calm face and hard eyes. She had commanded the Baeko for 6 years and had learned to trust silence more than noise. She studied the wreck on the main display and said nothing for a long time. "There is a life sign," the sensor officer reported. "One, very faint, lower decks." Sujin looked at Do-hyun. He was already reaching for his field kit. "Take Jinho and 2 Marines," she said. "Be quick. That structure will not hold." Lieutenant Ha Jinho was waiting at the airlock when Do-hyun arrived. Jinho was tall and loud, and had a smile that could fill a room. He was not smiling now. He checked his rifle, nodded at the 2 Marines beside him, and stepped into the boarding shuttle without a word. They crossed the gap between the ships in less than a minute. The shuttle latched on to the barge's emergency port, and the seal hissed as it locked. Do-hyun was the first one through. The smell hit him before anything else. Death had a smell that no species could escape. It was old here, days old at least, and it filled the dark corridors like fog. They moved by the beams of their helmet lamps, stepping carefully over debris and twisted metal. They found the first bodies on the second deck. Rethi, dozens of them, small figures with pale gray scales and thin limbs, piled against the walls and in the corners. Do-hyun knelt beside one and checked it. Not killed by the explosion, not killed by the vacuum. There were burn marks on the chest, clean and precise. Pulse rounds, military grade. "They were executed," Jinho said quietly. He had come to the same conclusion. His face was tight. Someone blew the ship, and then came inside to finish the job. Do-hyun said nothing. He stood and kept walking. The life sign was below them, on the lowest deck, in what the ship's faded schematics called the cargo hold. He moved faster now, his boots ringing on the metal grating. The Marines followed. The cargo hold was the largest space on the ship, and it was full of the dead. Rows and rows of Rethi, all killed the same way. Clean shots, no resistance. They had not fought back. Do-hyun did not know if they could not, or simply did not. Either answer made his chest hurt. He found her in the farthest corner. She was small, even for a Rethi. A child, maybe 8 or 9 years old by human standards. She was curled beneath the body of an adult Rethi who had fallen over her, arms racked around the small frame. The adult was dead. The child was not. Do-hyun knelt slowly. The girl's scales were pale, almost white, and her dark eyes were enormous in her thin face. She was breathing in shallow, uneven gasps. There were wounds on her arms and legs, deep scratches, some infected. She had not eaten in days. The moment she saw his face, she shut her eyes. Not a flinch, not a scream. She simply closed her eyes, pressed her body flat against the floor, and went perfectly, completely still. Like a switch had been turned off inside her. Her small hands lay open at her sides. Her breathing slowed. She was waiting. Do-hyun had seen fear before. He had treated soldiers in shock and civilians in panic. But this was not fear. This was something older and deeper. This was a creature that had learned, through every moment of its short life, that when a larger being found you, you died. and the only thing you could control was how still you were when it happened. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard and set his field kit down. Then he reached up and removed his helmet. The air in the hold was thin and cold and tasted like rust, but he needed her to see his face, a real face, not a visor. He did not touch her. He did not reach for her. He sat on the cold metal floor, 2 arm lengths away, and he spoke. "Hey," he said softly. "You are safe. I am not going to hurt you." She did not move. Her eyes stayed shut. Her body stayed flat. Jinho's voice came through the comm. "Do-hyun, we need to go. This deck is losing pressure. We have maybe 10 minutes. "Then I will use 10 minutes, Do-hyun said. He took a water pouch from his kit and opened it. He placed it on the floor between them. He sat back. He waited. The minutes passed. The ship groaned around them, metal bending and cracking as the structure slowly gave way. The Marines shifted nervously at the entrance to the hold. Jinho stood with his arms crossed, watching, saying nothing for once in his life. After 7 minutes, the girl opened one eye. It was just a crack, just a sliver of dark iris between pale lids. She looked at Do-hyun. She looked at the water. She looked at his hands, empty and open on his knees. She looked at the place where his weapon should have been, and saw that he had placed it on the floor behind him. She did not understand. Do-hyun saw the confusion on her face, and it nearly broke him. She was not confused about whether he was dangerous. She was confused about why he had not killed her yet. The concept of mercy was so far outside her experience that she could not even recognize it. "We need to leave this place," he said gently. "Can I carry you?" She did not answer. She did not nod. But when he slowly extended his arms, she did not shut her eyes again. She let him lift her. She was impossibly light, like holding air, and she was shaking so hard, he could feel it in his teeth. He carried her through the dead corridors, past the bodies of her people, through the airlock, and into the shuttle. She kept her face pressed against his chest and did not look. On the Baiko, the crew was waiting. Some watched with curiosity, some with pity, some with the quiet, hard look of people who were already calculating the political cost. Captain Bae Soo-jin stood at the edge of the medical bay as Do-hyun carried the girl inside and placed her carefully on the recovery bed. "She stays," Soo-jin said. It was not a question. "She stays," Do-hyun agreed. The girl lay in the bed, with her eyes half open, watching Do-hyun through the glass as he sat at the desk outside and began filling out her medical report. She watched him for a long time. She did not understand why she was alive. She did not understand why the water had been offered instead of a weapon. She did not understand any of it. But she kept her eyes open, and for now, that was enough. The girl did not speak for 5 days. She lay in the medical bay of the UNSS Baiko like a ghost. She ate only when no one was watching, and the crew learned this quickly, because the food trays left beside her bed would remain untouched for hours and then suddenly be empty the moment the room was unoccupied. She drank water in small, careful sips. She flinched when the door opened. She pressed herself flat against the bed whenever someone walked too close, and her eyes would go glassy and distant, like she had left her body and gone somewhere far away inside her own mind. Rim Soi was the ship's xenobiologist, a quiet woman with gentle hands and a habit of talking to herself while she worked. She spent 3 full days studying everything the human databases had on the Rethi species, and what she found made her sit alone in her lab for a long time before she could speak about it. She called a meeting in the briefing room. Captain Bae Soo-jin sat at the head of the table. Lieutenant Ha Jinho leaned against the wall with his arms folded. Kang Do-hyun sat closest to the door, as if ready to leave at any moment and go back to the medical bay. The Rethi were a client species of the Nuvari Dominion for over 300 years, So Yi began. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. They were used as laborers, servants, and disposable soldiers. Their homeworld was stripped bare 2 centuries ago. They have no territory, no fleet, no representation in the galactic concord. Most species consider them extinct. She paused. She looked at Do-hyun. The behavior you described, when she shut her eyes and went still, it is called the death posture. It is not a choice. It is biological. When a Rethi is certain that death is coming, and there is no escape, their body enters a state of complete stillness. Their heart rate drops, their muscles relax, their claws retract. It is designed to make the killing faster and less painful. The room was silent. It is not submission, Soyi continued, and now her voice cracked just slightly. It is not giving up. It is the body saying, I know what happens next, and I am making it easier for you to do it. Rethi children learn this response before they learn to speak. It is the first survival skill they are taught. Not how to fight, not how to run, how to die well. Jinho pushed away from the wall and walked out of the room without a word. No one stopped him. Through the open door, Do-hyun could see him standing in the corridor with his back to them, one hand pressed flat against the bulkhead, his shoulders tight. Do-hyun looked down at his own hands. He thought about the girl in the cargo hold. He thought about how she had opened one eye and looked at him with pure confusion, not because she feared him, but because she could not understand why he was not killing her. He thought about what kind of life teaches a child that kindness is more confusing than violence. That evening, he went to the medical bay and sat in the chair outside her recovery pod. He did not go inside. He did not ask her to talk. He simply sat there with his own meal tray and ate his dinner. She watched him through the glass with her enormous dark eyes, and he pretended not to notice. He came back the next evening, and the next, and the next. On the 4th evening, he brought a small datapad and began reading aloud. The stories were old Korean folk tales that had been translated into Galactic Common. Simple tales about clever rabbits and foolish tigers and kind woodcutters who helped strangers in the forest. His voice was low and unhurried. He did not look at her while he read. He just let the words fill the quiet space between them. She listened, he could tell, because her breathing changed when he read. It slowed and deepened, and the tension in her small body eased just a fraction. She still did not speak. She still flinched when the door opened, but she listened. Soyi noticed something else during her daily medical checks. The girl's claws, small retractable points at the tips of her fingers, were cracked and broken. Not from fighting, from scratching at herself. It was a Rethi stress behavior, a way of turning fear inward when there was no outward escape. The girl had been hurting herself quietly, in the dark, when no one was watching. Soyi prepared a healing salve, gentle enough for Rethi skin. She gave it to Do-hyun and explained how to apply it. Do-hyun took the small jar and went to the medical bay that evening. He placed it on the table beside the girl's bed, within her reach. He did not touch her. He did not explain it. He simply set it down, looked at her, and said, "For your hands, if you want it." Then he left. The next morning, the jar had been opened. The salve had been used. Do-hyun said nothing about it. Soyi said nothing about it. They simply refilled the jar each day and left it in the same place. It was small. It was quiet. It was the opposite of everything the galaxy had ever given her. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the world outside the ship was moving in darker directions. Captain Bae Soo-jin received a coded transmission on the diplomatic channel. The message was from the Nuvari Dominion, stamped with the personal seal of a regional warlord named Voreth Tal. Soo-jin read the message twice. Her face did not change, but her hand tightened on the arm of her command chair until her knuckles went white. The message stated that the Rethi female aboard The UNSS Baiko was registered property of the Nuvari Dominion under the Interspecies Commerce Accord. It stated that she had been cargo aboard a transport vessel that was lawfully destroyed for disciplinary purposes. It stated that all other cargo had been disposed of, but this particular unit had been listed as unaccounted for. It demanded the immediate return of the property. Sujin called Do-hyun and Jin-ho to the bridge. She showed them the message. Jin-ho read it, and his face went red. Do-hyun read it, and his face went very still, which was worse. "She is not property," Do-hyun said. "The Nuvari say she is," Sujin replied. "The Concord has never ruled otherwise. The Rethi were never granted sentient classification in the Galactic Registry." "Then the registry is wrong," Do-hyun said. Sujin looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to their console and typed a response. It was one line long. She read it aloud as she sent it. "The Human Alliance does not recognize the ownership of sentient beings. File a complaint." Jin-ho let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Do-hyun felt something loosen in his chest. But the relief did not last. Intelligence reports began filtering in over the next 2 days. Vorith Tal was not filing a complaint. He was assembling a battle group. 3 warships had been spotted moving toward the demilitarized corridor. Then 5. Then 7. The Baiko was 1 ship. A good ship, with a good crew, but 1 ship. And the girl in the medical bay had no idea that her existence had just become the center of a conflict between 2 powers. That night, Do-hyun sat in his usual chair and read aloud from the folktale about the rabbit who tricks the Dragon King. It was a story about a small, weak creature that survives not through strength, but through cleverness and stubborn refusal to accept its own death. He was halfway through the story when he heard a sound. Small, thin, barely there. The girl was watching him from the bed. Her eyes were wide and dark, and full of something that might have been hope, or might have been the place where hope would grow if it was given enough time. Do-hyun smiled. It was the first real smile he had managed in days. "Always," he said. "The rabbit always lives." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled her knees up to her chest and rested her chin on them. She kept her eyes open, and she waited for him to continue the story. Her name, they would learn later, was Yuna. Relay Station Gyumho was the kind of place that pretended to be neutral. It floated at the intersection of 4 trade routes, a massive spinning structure of metal and glass, where 100 species did business, made deals, and carefully avoided looking too closely at each other's sins. It was the place where the galaxy came to be polite about terrible things. The UNSS Baiko docked at Port 17. Word had already spread. A human warship was carrying a Rethi survivor, and had told the Nuvari Dominion to file a complaint. In the bars and trading halls of Gyumho, species that had not thought about the Rethi in 100 years were suddenly talking about them, mostly to agree that the humans were being foolish. Captain Bae Sujin stood in her quarters and read the diplomatic messages that had flooded in overnight. The Verath Collective advised the humans to return the girl and preserve stability. The Anthari Trade Union expressed concern about disruption to commerce in the corridor. The Galactic Concord itself had sent a formal summons, requesting the Baiko's commanding officer to appear at a subspace hearing to address the dispute. Not one message asked if the girl was safe. Not one asked her name. Sujin, dressed in her formal uniform, the dark blue one with the silver collar pins that she hated because they dug into her neck. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Then she called Do-hyun to accompany her as a witness. "You are a medic," she told him as they walked to the communications bay. "Not a diplomat. Do not try to be clever. Just tell them what you saw." "I am not clever," Do-hyun said. "I know," Sujin replied. "That is why I am bringing you." The hearing was conducted via subspace link. The Baco's communications bay was converted into a temporary chamber, with hollow projectors displaying the members of the Galactic Concord's dispute panel. There were 12 of them, each from a different species, each seated behind a curved desk that floated in the blue light of the projection. They looked serious and important and deeply uncomfortable. On the far side of the chamber, a separate projection flickered to life. Voreth Tal appeared. He was enormous. Even as a hologram, he filled the space with a weight that was not entirely physical. His skin was dark gray and ridged, like stone that had been carved into the shape of something alive. His armor was black and covered in small marks that Do-Hyun later learned were kill tallies. His eyes were yellow and flat, and looked at everything in the room the way a predator looks at a field of grass, checking for movement. He spoke first, as was his right under Nuvari protocol. His voice was deep and calm, and perfectly reasonable, which made everything he said worse. "The female in question is registered cargo," Voreth Tal said. "Identification number RV7734, batch designation Reth Hollow, assigned to Transport Vessel 9 of my fleet. The vessel was destroyed under lawful disciplinary action following a labor violation by the cargo. All units were disposed of except RV7734, which was listed as unrecovered. I am here to collect my property." He produced a holographic document. Registration numbers, batch codes, transport logs, everything was neat and legal and stamped with the proper seals. The Rethi girl, the child who had learned Do-Hyun's name 3 days ago and whispered it like a secret, was listed between a shipment of mineral ore and a crate of machine parts. The panel moderator, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, reviewed the documents and nodded slowly. "The registration appears to be in order under the Interspecies Commerce Accord. Commander Voreth Tal's claim has legal standing." Sujin's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. This was not her moment. "We now hear the response from the Human Alliance representative," the moderator said. Sujin gestured to Do-Hyun. He stood. He was not a large man. He was not an impressive man. He wore the simple gray uniform of a combat medic, and his hands were the hands of someone who spent more time stitching wounds than shaking hands with diplomats. He stood in front of 12 species that could each end his career with a single vote, and he did not try to be anything other than what he was. "I was part of the recovery team that boarded the destroyed transport," he said. His voice was steady. "We found 114 dead Rethi aboard. They were not killed by the explosion. They were executed. Pulse rounds, close range, 1 shot each. Many of them were still in their restraints. The chamber was quiet. In the lowest cargo hold, I found a child. She was approximately 8 years old. She was underneath the body of an adult who had tried to shield her. She was starving, wounded, and alone. She had been alone for at least 4 days. He paused. He was not pausing for effect. He was pausing because the next part was hard to say. When she saw me, she closed her eyes and went completely still. She did not scream. She did not cry. She laid flat and opened her hands and waited for me to kill her. Our xenobiologist has confirmed that this is a biological response called the death posture. It is something Rethi children learn before they learn to speak. It is designed to make their killing quicker and less painful for the killer. No one in the chamber moved. This child, Do-Hyun continued, has never known a single act of kindness from any species in this galaxy. She did not know what mercy was. She had no word for it. When I offered her water instead of a weapon, she was not grateful. She was confused. She could not understand why I was not doing what every other being in her life had done. He looked at Voreth Tal's hologram. The warlord's flat yellow eyes stared back without blinking. "You built a legal system where a child's last hope is to die quickly," Do-Hyun said, "and you are asking me to send her back to it." He let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. "No." The chamber remained still for a long time. The panel moderators exchanged glances. Several of them looked down at their desks. One of them, a small being with deep blue skin, closed its eyes briefly. But when the ruling came, it was exactly what Sujin had expected. "The panel finds that the matter is unresolved," the moderator announced. "We recommend further diplomatic negotiation between the parties. No enforcement action will be taken at this time." It was a nothing ruling. A coward's ruling. It meant the Concord was too afraid of the Nuvari to act, and too aware of the cameras to openly side with them. It meant they had looked at a child suffering and decided it was somebody else's problem. Voreth Tal smiled. It was a thin, sharp expression that did not reach his eyes. He leaned forward in his projection. "I will come and collect what is mine," he said. "I suggest the humans do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." The projection cut out. Sujin and Do-hyun walked back to the main deck in silence. The corridors of the Baiko felt smaller than usual, like the walls were pressing in. Do-hyun was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. When they reached the mess hall, he stopped. Yuna was there. She was sitting at the far corner table, alone, her small body hunched over a tray of food. She was eating slowly and carefully, in the open, where people could see her. It was the first time she had done this. Around her the crew moved quietly, pretending not to notice, giving her space. When she saw Do-hyun, something changed in her face. She reached across the table and picked up a small piece of fruit from her tray. She held it out toward him. Her hand was trembling, but she held it steady. It was the first thing she had ever offered another living being. The first time she had ever given instead of lost. Do-hyun took the fruit. He sat down across from her. He ate it slowly. Jinho, standing in the doorway, turned and walked away. Zoe, sitting 3 tables back, pressed her hand over her mouth and looked at the ceiling. That evening, Captain Bae Sujin called the crew to the main deck. She stood before them, with her hands behind her back and her chin level. She told them what the Concord had decided, which was nothing. She told them what Voreth Tal had promised, which was war. She told them the truth, which was that they were one ship against a warlord with a fleet, and that the smart thing to do would be to hand the girl over and go home. Then she asked, "Does anyone here want to hand her over?" The ship was silent. 240 crew members. Not one voice. Sujin nodded once. "Then we hold." The Nuvari battle group arrived on the 3rd day. 7 ships came out of hyperspace in a loose formation, each one larger than the Baiko, each one bristling with weapons that had been built for one purpose. They spread across the mouth of the demilitarized corridor like a hand closing around a throat, and they stopped, and they waited. On the bridge of the Baiko, the sensor officer read the numbers aloud. 2 heavy cruisers, 3 escort destroyers, 1 carrier with fighter squadrons already deploying, and at the center, the flagship, a massive black vessel with a hull shaped like a blade turned sideways. Voreth Tal's personal warship. Captain Bae Sujin sat in her chair and listened to the numbers with a face made of stone. She had sent a distress signal to the Human Alliance Second Fleet 18 hours ago. The nearest response had come from the dreadnought UNSS Halasan, which was already en route at maximum speed. But maximum speed was still hours away. The math was simple. They were alone. "He is hailing us," the communications officer said. "Put him through," Sujin replied. Voreth Tal's face filled the main screen. He looked the same as he had at the hearing, calm and enormous, and absolutely certain that the universe would arrange itself to his liking. "Captain," he said, "I will ask once. Surrender the cargo and you may leave." "And if I do not?" Sujin asked. "Then I will take it from your wreckage," Voreth Tal said, "and I will add your crew to the list of beings who died for something that was not worth dying for." Sujin looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached forward and cut the transmission. "Battle stations," she said. The Baiko came alive. Lights shifted to combat red. Weapon systems powered up with a low, heavy hum that vibrated through the deck plates. Crew members ran to their positions with the focused urgency of people who had trained for this moment and hoped it would never come. Do-hyun was not on the bridge. He was in the medical bay, preparing for casualties. He set out surgical kits, charged the emergency pods, and checked the blood supplies. His hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who had done this many times. But his mind was somewhere else. He went to Yuna. She was sitting on her bed, with her knees pulled up to her chest. She already knew. She could feel the ship changing around her, the vibrations of the weapons charging, the hurried boots in the corridors. Her eyes were wide and dark, and she had the look of someone who had seen this exact moment before, in a different place, with a different ending. "You should give me back," she said. Her voice was small but clear. She had been speaking more over the past days. Short sentences in careful galactic common, each word chosen like a stone, placed on uncertain ground. But these words came out fast, as if she had been holding them, and they had finally broken free. "I am not worth a ship full of people," she said. "The Rethi have a saying, one stone does not stop the river." Do-hyun knelt in front of her, so his eyes were level with hers. He looked at her face, at the pale scales, and the dark eyes, and the small cracked claws that were healing now, because someone had left a jar of salve beside her bed every night. "You are not a stone," he said, "and I am not a river. I am just a man who made a promise when I picked you up." Yuna looked at him. Her eyes filled with something bright and terrible, and she shut them tight, but not in the death posture. This time, she was trying not to cry, and the difference between the two was the distance between everything she had been and everything she was becoming. Do-hyun put his hand on top of hers, gently, and she did not pull away. "Stay here," he said. "I will come back." He went to the bridge. The battle began without ceremony. Vorith Tal did not give a second warning. His ships moved forward in attack formation, and the first volley of fire lit up the darkness of the corridor like a second sun. Sujin fought the way she lived, with cold precision and a refusal to waste anything. The corridor was full of old wreckage, the remains of ships destroyed in wars that nobody remembered. She drove the backhoe into the densest field of debris, threading through the twisted metal skeletons of dead vessels at speeds that made the helmsman's knuckles white. The Nuvari ships were bigger. That was their strength and their weakness. In open space, they would have crushed the backhoe in minutes. But in the narrow channels between the wrecks, their size became a cage. Sujin pulled them in, turned hard, and let Jinho do what he did best. Jinho sat at the tactical console, with a focus that seemed to belong to a different person than the loud, grinning man who told bad jokes in the mess hall. He fired with terrifying accuracy, placing each shot where the enemy armor was thinnest, where the debris provided no cover, where the Nuvari pilots had to choose between taking the hit or crashing into a wreck. Two escort destroyers tried to follow the backhoe through a gap between the hulls of two ancient battleships. Jinho put a torpedo into the gap at exactly the right moment. One destroyer lost its engine section and spun into the wreckage. The other pulled back with half its weapons offline. But the backhoe was taking damage too. The shields flickered and dropped with each hit, and each time they came back a little weaker. A section of the port hull breached on deck 4, and the emergency bulkhead sealed it with a sound like a giant slamming a door. 3 crew members were injured, then 7, then 12. Do-hyun worked in the medical bay, with blood on his hands, and the sound of explosions shaking the walls. Voreth Tal was not patient. He was not the kind of commander who accepted a slow victory. The backhoe had destroyed 2 of his escorts and crippled a 3rd, and his yellow eyes burned with a fury that had nothing to do with the girl, and everything to do with pride. He ordered all remaining ships to concentrate fire on the human vessel. The Bako's shields failed. The next volley tore through the outer hull on 3 decks. Fires broke out. Systems went dark. On the bridge, sparks flew from a console, and the lights flickered. Sujin gripped her chair and shouted orders through the noise. Rerouting power, sealing compartments, keeping the ship alive through pure stubborn will. But everyone on the bridge could see the tactical display. The next volley would be the last. And then the long-range sensors made a sound that no one expected. New contacts. Incoming. Not from the direction of the Human Alliance fleet. From deep space. From the empty black between the stars, where nothing lived and nothing traveled. 3 ships appeared on the display. They were small. They were old. Their hulls were patched with mismatched metal, and their engines burned with the unsteady light of reactors that should have failed decades ago. They were held together by desperation and memory and nothing else. They were Rethi, the last of the Rethi diaspora, survivors who had been hiding in the deep void for years, moving from shadow to shadow, too few to fight, too stubborn to die. They had heard the subspace broadcast of Do-hyun's speech at the Concord hearing. They had heard a human stand before the galaxy and say no, and they had come. They could not fight the Nuvari. Everyone on every ship in the corridor knew this. The 3 Rethi vessels had no weapons worth mentioning, no shields worth measuring, no tactical value of any kind. They flew directly between the Bako and Vorethtal's flagship. They stopped. And they broadcast on every frequency, in every language, to every receiver in range. We are the last of Reth. If you fire, fire through us. Let the galaxy see. The broadcast went out across the corridor. It reached Relay Station Gumho. It reached the Concord Assembly. It reached news networks in 40 systems. It reached billions of beings who had never heard of the Rethi, and now saw 3 ancient ships, crewed by the last survivors of a forgotten people, placing themselves between a warship and a child. Vorethtal did not stop because of mercy. Mercy was not a concept his species valued. He stopped because he calculated. The broadcast was live. The galaxy was watching. If he fired through the Rethi ships, he would not just kill a few dozen survivors. He would create martyrs, and martyrs were more dangerous than warships. Before he could decide, the long-range sensors sang again. 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace behind the Bako. Human Alliance Second Fleet. The dreadnought UNSS Halasan led the formation. A ship so large, it blotted out the stars behind it. Its weapons were already charged. Its targeting systems were already locked. Vorethtal looked at the tactical display for a long time. Then he gave the order to withdraw. His ships turned and pulled back toward Nuvari space, one by one, until only his flagship remained. He sent one final transmission. This is not over, human. Then he was gone. In the silence that followed, the 3 Rethi ships docked with the Bako. The airlocks opened, and Rethi survivors came aboard, one by one. Dozens of them, thin and scarred, and shaking with a fear that had become as natural as breathing. They walked through the corridors of the human ship and looked at everything with the wide, disbelieving eyes of people who had forgotten what safety felt like. And then they saw Yuna. She stood at the end of the corridor, small and pale and alive. An elderly Rethi, her scales faded to almost white, saw the girl and fell to her knees. Yuna ran to her. They were not related. They had never met. But the old woman held the girl, and the girl held the old woman, and neither of them closed their eyes. Do-hyun stood in the doorway of the medical bay and watched. His hands were still covered in blood from the wounded he had treated. His uniform was torn. He was exhausted in a way that went past the body and into the bone. But he watched Yuna hold on to another living being of her own kind, with her eyes open, choosing to keep them open, and he thought that maybe the rabbit really did always live. 6 months changed everything, and nothing. The footage spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Do-hyun's speech at the Concorde. The three Rethi ships placing themselves between a warlord and a child. The live broadcast that forced a fleet to turn around. News networks ran the story for weeks. Commentators debated it. Politicians used it. Ordinary beings across 1,000 worlds watched a medic kneel in front of a panel of 12 species and say no. And something shifted in the way the galaxy thought about small, forgotten people. The human alliance moved quickly. They had always been good at turning public attention into political action, and this was the kind of moment that came once in a generation. Ambassador Park Eun-ji, a sharp woman with gray hair and the patience of a mountain, drafted a formal resolution for the Galactic Concorde. It was simple in language and enormous in meaning. The Rethi were to be reclassified as a protected sentient species, granted full rights under galactic law, and provided with a permanent settlement on an unclaimed colony world. The debate lasted 3 weeks. It was bitter and messy, and full of the kind of arguments that made Do-hyun want to leave the room and never come back. The Nuvari Dominion opposed it openly. Voref Tal sent a representative, who spoke for 4 hours about property rights and legal precedent, and the danger of setting a precedent that could destabilize the Commerce Accord. Several other species opposed it quietly, afraid of the Nuvari, afraid of change, afraid of what it would mean if they admitted that they had spent 3 centuries looking the other way, while an entire people were ground into dust. But the footage kept playing. The image of 3 broken ships floating between a child and a war fleet. The sound of a voice saying, "We are the last of Reth. If you fire, fire through us." The resolution passed, narrowly, bitterly, but it passed. Voref Tal was publicly censured. It was a slap on the wrist, a formal statement of disapproval that carried no real punishment. He retreated to his territory and said nothing in public. But the intelligence reports that crossed Captain Bae Sujin's desk told a different story. He was not gone. He was not broken. He was quiet. And quiet in a creature like Voref Tal was more dangerous than noise. The colony world was called Naru. It was a small planet in a system that nobody had wanted, with thin forests and wide gray plains, and a sky that turned orange at sunset. It was not beautiful by most standards. The soil was rocky. The nearest trade route was 2 days away at standard speed. But it was theirs. The Rethi settlement grew slowly, the way living things grow when they have been starved for a long time. The first buildings were prefab shelters brought by human supply ships. Plain gray boxes arranged in careful rows on a flat piece of ground near a river. The Rethi did not complain about the shelters. They touched the walls like they were touching something holy. A floor that belonged to them, a door they could close, a roof that no one would take away. Rim Soi transferred from the Baiko to the settlement. She said it was because the xenobiology work was more interesting on the ground, but everyone knew the real reason. She had watched Yuna grow from a silent ghost into a person, and she was not ready to stop watching. She set up a small research lab in one of the shelters and began cataloging Rethi biology, culture, and language with the quiet focus of someone who understood that the first step to saving a people was making sure they were seen. Yuna followed Soi everywhere. She had a sharp mind, sharper than anyone had expected, and she absorbed information the way dry earth absorbs rain. She learned the names of every plant in the settlement's growing fields. She learned how the water filtration systems worked. She learned the Rethi words for things that the Rethi had not needed words for in 300 years. Home, safety, tomorrow. She still flinched at sudden noises. She still slept with one eye open, curled against the wall with her back to the door. Healing was not a straight line. It was a path that doubled back on itself, that climbed and fell and sometimes disappeared entirely, before reappearing in an unexpected place. There were nights when she woke up shaking and could not stop, and Soyi would sit beside her in the dark and say nothing, just be there, the way Doyun had been there on the Beiko. Doyun himself had been reassigned. Captain Bei Sujin had pulled strings with people whose names she would never reveal, and he had been given a new position as a liaison officer, coordinating between the Human Alliance and the Rethi settlement. It was technically a promotion. Doyun said it felt like being punished with paperwork. Sujin told him to stop complaining. He arrived on Naru on a supply shuttle and stepped onto the gray soil and looked around at the small, plain settlement, with its rows of shelters and its muddy paths, and its people who were learning to stand upright after centuries of being forced to kneel. It was not much, but it was real, and that made it more than most things he had seen in the galaxy. Jinho came too, because Jinho always came where the trouble was, and also because he had submitted a transfer request the day after the battle, and refused to explain why to anyone except Sujin. And what he told her, he made her promise never to repeat. He worked on the settlement's perimeter defenses, building sensor arrays and shield generators, with the same focus he had used to destroy Nuvari warships. When the Rethi children watched him work, he showed them how the tools functioned and let them press the buttons that made the lights turn on. And he pretended that the sound of their laughter did not make his eyes wet. 3 months after the settlement was founded, a ceremony was held. It was not large. The assembly was held in the open air, on the flat ground between the shelters, under a sky that was just beginning to turn orange with the first sunset. Rethi sat in rows on the ground. Humans stood at the edges. A dozen other species watched via subspace broadcast, including the Concord panel that had once ruled the matter unresolved. Yuna was asked to speak. She was the first Rethi rescued, the one whose face had been on every news broadcast in the galaxy, the girl who had shut her eyes and waited to die and instead had lived. The settlement elders asked her because they felt it was right, and because they wanted the galaxy to hear a Rethi voice speak for itself. She was terrified. Dohyun found her behind the lab building an hour before the ceremony, sitting on a rock with her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped tight around herself. She was not in the death posture. She was just afraid in the ordinary way that ordinary people are afraid when they have to stand up in front of others and say something that matters. "You do not have to do this," Dohyun said. "I want to." "Then why are you sitting behind the building?" "Because I want to, and I am scared. Both things are true." Dohyun sat beside her on the rock. They watched the sky change color together. "What do I say?" Yuna asked. "Whatever is true," Dohyun said. She nodded. She stood up. She walked to the assembly. The crowd settled as she stepped onto the small raised platform that the humans had built from spare cargo panels. She was still small. She would always be small. Her pale scales caught the orange light of the setting sun and turned warm. Her hands were steady, but just barely. She spoke. "I was born on a transport ship," she said. "I do not know which one. I was told that I was cargo. I was told my number. I was not told my name. My name was given to me later, by the woman who died shielding me, and she whispered it to me once, and I kept it inside myself, like a seed keeps a tree." The assembly was silent. "When the humans found me, I shut my eyes. All Rethi know this. When death comes, you close your eyes, and you go still, and you hope it is quick. I shut my eyes, and I waited. I was not afraid. I was past fear. I was in the place where you go when fear has used up everything inside you, and there is nothing left." She paused. She looked out at the crowd. She found Dohyun standing at the back, beside Jinho. She looked at his face and drew a breath, but death did not come. There was a voice. It was soft. There was a sound like something being set down on the ground. Later I learned it was a helmet, then a weapon. Then there was water. Her voice trembled but did not break. I did not know what kind this was. I had no word for it. I thought it was a different kind of cruelty that I had not yet learned. It took me a very long time to understand that some beings choose to protect what they have no reason to protect. That some beings look at a small broken thing and do not think, what is this worth, but think, this is alive, and that is enough. She swallowed. The humans call this compassion. The Rethi are still learning the word, but we will not forget who taught it to us. The broadcast went out across the galaxy, in stations and ships and council halls and living rooms on 100 worlds. People watched a small, pale girl with dark eyes speak about the first time someone chose not to kill her. Some of them felt ashamed. Some of them felt angry. Some of them felt something they could not name, something that sat in the chest like a weight and would not move. Do-hyun was standing at the back of the crowd. Jin-ho was beside him. Jin-ho looked at him and said, "You know you are never going to live this down, right?" Do-hyun told him to shut up. His eyes were red, and he did not care who saw. Captain Bae Sujin watched from the bridge of the Baekho, still in orbit above Naru. She had been invited to attend the ceremony on the surface, but she had declined. She said someone needed to stay with the ship. The real reason was that Sujin did not cry in front of other people, and she had known she would cry. She smiled for the first time in months. She turned off the broadcast and went back to work. That night, after the ceremony, after the lights in the settlement had dimmed, and the Rethi had gone inside their shelters, Yuna found Do-hyun sitting outside on the gray plain, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. Naru's sky was different from anything either of them had known. The stars were thick and close, and the galaxy's arms stretched across the horizon like a river of light. Yuna sat beside him, close, not distant, her shoulder almost touching his arm. She looked up at the sky with her eyes wide open, and she did not shut them. "Tell me the story," she said, "the one about the rabbit and the dragon." Do-hyun looked at her. He smiled. Again? Again. So he told her. He told her about the rabbit who was small and clever, and refused to give up, and the dragon who was vast and powerful, and could not understand why such a small creature would not simply surrender. He told her how the rabbit tricked the dragon, not with strength, not with weapons, but with the stubborn, foolish, unshakable belief that being small did not mean being nothing. And when he reached the end of the story, and said that the rabbit lived, Yuna did not ask if it was true. She already believed him.